I'm 32, and at my father's will reading they slid me a single dollar like I was a stranger, and then my sister walked out with $2.4 million in the house. And then 3 days later, I found a hidden drawer with a letter in my dead father's handwriting that started with, "I never wanted a second daughter." And I realized my whole life wasn't unlucky, it was engineered. If you're interested in this topic, hit the like button, subscribe, and type "interested" in the comments. And I will give you a heart. I'm not going to start with the hospital or the funeral or any of the soft stuff people use to warm you up, because the first thing you need to see is the punchline they handed me like a joke they expected me to swallow. $1. Not $1 each to be symbolic. Not $1 plus a sentimental item. One single dollar to my name after my father died, while my sister sat there blinking like she was trying not to look excited. And then the lawyer kept reading, and the numbers got so big they sounded like lottery winnings, and I sat there thinking, okay, maybe this is the part where he says, "And to my other daughter, I leave the rest," because surely this is just some cruel setup, right? Some dramatic pause, some test of character, something. But no, that pause never came. The room stayed heavy. The air smelled like leather chairs and old cologne, and that faint anxiety scent people get when money is about to change hands. And the lawyer said my sister's name with a kind of respect people reserve for heir, not daughter. And he listed the house, and he listed the accounts, and he listed the investments, and he listed the personal effects, which is rich people language for everything you ever wanted but pretended you didn't. And my sister's husband did. That tiny jaw clench, like he was trying to act surprised for the audience. And then he said my name, and I felt every set of eyes shift toward me like a spotlight, and I swear I could hear the little clicks of judgment in people's heads, the family math they were doing, the quiet conclusions. She must have been the problem. She must have done something. She must have deserved it. And the lawyer cleared his throat like he was about to announce a charity raffle prize, and he said, "I leave the sum of $1. That was it. $1. A dead man's final mic drop. I didn't cry. Not yet. I didn't yell. Not yet. I just sat there, and I felt my body go cold in that weird way it does when your brain refuses to accept what your ears just heard. My mother sat at the head of the table like a grieving queen in black, hands folded, face carefully arranged, not even looking at me, and my sister, let's call her Celine, looked down at her nails like she'd suddenly discovered a speck of dust worth studying. The lawyer asked if there were questions, and somebody chuckled, actually chuckled, like this was some family story they'd be retelling over drinks later. And I stood up so fast my chair scraped loud enough that the whole room flinched, and I said, "No questions," because if I asked a question in that moment, I knew I'd lose control and say something that would make them all feel justified. And I walked out. I walked out of that office and into a hallway that smelled like polished wood and expensive silence, and the elevator felt like it took a year to arrive, and when the doors finally closed, that's when my hands started shaking. I kept staring at my palm because the lawyer had actually placed the dollar bill in an envelope and slid it across to me like a tip, like I'd done a service by existing, and I kept thinking, wow, he really wanted to make sure I got the message. Not forgotten. Not overlooked. Targeted. And if you've ever been the extra child in your own family, you know exactly what I mean when I say this wasn't about money yet, it was about position. This was them pointing to the scoreboard and saying, "See, you never mattered." And the worst part is, I wasn't even shocked. I was offended, yes, but shocked? No. Because the $1 was just the loud version of what I'd been getting my whole life in quiet forms. When I was a kid, Celine got the room with the bay window and the closet that smelled like cedar. I got the room with the stuck door and the radiator that hissed at night like it was angry I existed. When Celine wanted ballet, we found a way. When I wanted piano, we couldn't afford it. When Celine failed a class, my father sat with her and planned a better path. When I got top marks, he nodded like it was expected and went back to his paper. My father was a respected businessman, the kind of man people called disciplined because they didn't live with him, and my mother, let's call her Vivian, was the kind of woman who could cry without smudging mascara, which I used to think was a talent until I realized it was practice. I learned early that love in our house wasn't a blanket. It was a receipt. You earned it, you begged for it, you performed for it, and even then it could be revoked for reasons no one would explain. So when my father had his heart attack 4 weeks earlier, and my mother called me like she was placing an order, I went.
Of course I went.
I always go. That's what the invisible child does. They show up because they're hoping one day somebody notices. I drove 4 hours through the dark with my jaw clenched so tight my teeth ached, and all the way there my brain kept replaying every moment I'd ever tried to be enough. Every time I told myself, this time he'll see me, this time he'll soften, this time he'll say something normal like, I'm proud of you. I got to the hospital and the lights buzzed overhead like tired insects, and the ICU smelled like antiseptic and warmed plastic, and my father looked smaller than he ever had. The same man who used to fill doorways with his presence now tucked into white sheets like he could disappear. I sat by his bed, and I said my name out loud, like you do when you're trying to anchor someone to the world, and his eyelids fluttered like they recognized a sound but didn't care enough to open. And I stayed. I stayed for 3 days. My sister called once from somewhere that sounded sunny, and she said, "Is he awake yet?" Like he was a package being delivered, and when I said no, she said, "Okay, keep me posted." And that was it. My mother came in short bursts, always with a reason she had to leave, always with her phone in her hand, like it was the real emergency. And in those long hours, I started noticing things I'd ignored before, like how the nurses assumed I was the only daughter because I was the only one there, and how they praised me for being loyal like loyalty was a virtue and not a survival strategy. On the 3rd night, my father opened his eyes just enough to search the room, and then he whispered a name, and it wasn't mine. It was Celine. He said it like a prayer. Celine. Again.
And again.
And I sat there with my throat burning, and I did what I'd always done. I swallowed it. I pretended I didn't hear, because in my family, pretending was the currency we all used to keep the peace. And then, the morning he died, he got lucid for a moment, like the fog lifted just long enough for him to remember he had something unfinished, and he looked at me with a kind of urgency I'd never seen from him, and he rasped, "The desk," and I leaned in so close I could smell the peppermint in his mouthwash, and he said, "The study," and his fingers tightened around mine with surprising strength. And he tried to say more, but the monitors started screaming and the staff flooded in, and somebody pulled me back like I was in the way, and my father's eyes locked on mine, and he mouthed something that looked like, "I'm sorry," or maybe I wanted it to, and then he was gone. He died reaching toward me, and leaving me with a clue like my life was a mystery novel he thought I didn't deserve to finish. Now, pause with me right here because I want to know something, and I mean it. Where are you watching from right now, and what time is it there? Because I'm telling you this story from my small apartment with a busted kitchen light and cold coffee, and I need to feel like I'm not talking into a void the way I did my whole childhood. So drop your city and the time, and tell me honestly, if your parents left you $1 while your sibling got millions, would you walk away quietly, or would you burn the whole family group chat to the ground? Because I didn't burn anything yet.
Not then.
The funeral came first, and my father's funeral was a performance with better outfits. People packed the church like it was a celebration. Colleagues, golf friends, distant relatives I'd never met, but who somehow felt entitled to judge me. They stood around telling stories about his generosity, and I kept thinking, generous to who? Because I can count on one hand the times he looked at me like he liked me. Celine stood up front with my mother receiving condolences like royalty, both of them in matching black designer outfits, and I sat behind them wearing something old that fit my body but not the moment. And when it was time for the eulogy, I stood with a paper in my hand, and my mother reached out and pressed down on my arm, not gently but firmly, like training a dog, and she hissed, "Let Celine do it. You'll get emotional." And I sat back down because, again, that's what I did. Celine delivered a perfect speech. All the right pauses, all the right tears, all the right words like unconditional love. And I felt my stomach twist because unconditional love was not a thing that lived in our house. After the service, an older woman I didn't recognize approached me and said my name like she'd been waiting years to say it. "You're Mara, aren't you?" she asked, and yes, I'm changing names because I'm not here to dox myself. I'm here to tell you the truth, and she handed me a card and said, "Call me. There are things you need to know, and don't trust them." And before I could ask who she was, she melted back into the crowd like a ghost. 3 days later, in that lawyer's office, they handed me my dollar and expected me to accept it like a verdict, and I walked out thinking about my father's last words. The desk, the study, the hidden, and I realized something that made my skin prickle. My father didn't die without leaving me anything. He left me a trail. He left me a door. And whatever was behind that door had to be big enough that he waited until the very last minute to point me to it, like he knew if he told me sooner, someone would stop me. So I drove to the house, not the house I grew up in, not our house, the house that was already being claimed by my mother and Celine like I'd never lived there at all. And my mother answered the door in a robe like grief was a costume she could wear between errands, and she stared at me like I'd shown up uninvited to my own childhood, and I told her I was picking up belongings. Because what else do you say when you're about to break into the emotional crime scene of your life? The hallway smelled like lemon polish and old photos, and the walls were lined with framed memories that somehow always centered Celine. Celine at graduation, Celine in a cap and gown, Celine holding a trophy, Celine smiling beside my father, and I walked past them like I was walking past evidence. My mother disappeared into the kitchen, and the house got quiet, and that's when I saw the study door slightly open, like it was breathing. I stepped inside, and the smell hit me first, leather and cigars and paper, the scent of a man who controlled rooms even when he wasn't in them. The desk sat there heavy and polished, like an altar, and my father's last words echoed in my head like a dare. The desk, the hidden. I pulled open the obvious drawers first, bills, files, photographs, and then I noticed something wrong. One drawer that felt shallow, like it was lying about how much it could hold, and I ran my fingers along the wood until I felt a ridge that shouldn't be there, and my heart started pounding in my ears, and I pressed down on one corner and heard it, the quietest click, the kind of sound that changes your life if you're paying attention. That click was so small it almost felt like my imagination, like the desk was messing with me, and then the panel shifted under my fingertips and I realized my father didn't just own secrets, he built furniture around them, and the rage that shot through me was clean and sharp because this wasn't forgetful dad behavior, this was intentional engineering, and I slid the false bottom up like I was disarming a trap, slow and careful, because my hands were suddenly sweaty and clumsy and I didn't want to tear anything, and underneath it sat 3 things stacked like a sick little gift set. A yellowed envelope, a thick leather-bound journal, and a sealed manila envelope with dark red wax pressed into it like a stamp of authority. The first envelope was the oldest, the paper brittle at the corners, and on the front, in my father's handwriting, was a date I knew like I knew my own pulse, the day I was born. I stood there in that study with my breath caught, listening for any sound from the kitchen, the clink of my mother's mug, the hum of the refrigerator, anything that meant she was moving closer, and I told myself, "You're not stealing, you're recovering." I slid my nail under the flap and eased it open because even in that moment, I didn't want to rip the evidence, like my body already knew this would matter later. Inside was a letter folded into thirds, and when I unfolded it, the paper crackled like dry leaves, and the first sentence hit me so hard my vision tunneled for a second. I never wanted a second daughter. Not I was scared. Not I wasn't ready. Not even I struggled. Wanted. Like I was a purchase he regretted. I read it again to make sure I hadn't hallucinated the words, and then I kept going, and every line felt like someone peeling skin off my ribs. He wrote about resources like children are budget items. He wrote about protecting the firstborn like Celine was a crown and I was a thief. He wrote about tolerating me, and you know what's wild? It wasn't emotional, it was administrative. Cold planning. The kind of tone you use when you're canceling a service or firing someone you never respected. My throat went tight and I had this neurotic thought, this stupid thought like my brain was trying to find humor to keep me from breaking. Wow, even his cruelty is well formatted. I looked around the room like the walls might react, like the framed certificates and the mahogany shelves might suddenly admit they'd been in on it. Then I heard a small sound from the kitchen, a cabinet door closing, and my body moved on pure instinct. I grabbed the journal and the sealed envelope and slid them under my arm, folded the letter back like my hands had done it 1,000 times, and tucked everything against my ribs so tight it hurt. I stepped toward the door, paused, listened, and then I realized something terrifying. I couldn't walk out the front door holding these. My mother would see. She would ask. She would stop me. And I didn't know yet if she was just complicit or actively dangerous. But I knew one thing with absolute clarity. In this family, truth didn't survive daylight. So I opened the desk's lower drawer again, grabbed a random stack of old receipts and a fountain pen to make it look like I'd been organizing, slid the drawer shut, wiped the edge with my sleeve like a paranoid person in a crime show, and then I left the study and moved through the hallway like I belonged there, like I wasn't shaking inside my own skin. In the kitchen, my mother stood by the sink with her back to me, her robe belt hanging loose, stirring something she wasn't eating, and when she turned, her eyes went straight to my hands, because mothers notice hands. They notice what you're carrying, and I forced a lazy voice out of my dry mouth and said, "I'm going to grab a few things from upstairs." And she nodded too fast, like she wanted me gone but didn't want to admit she wanted me gone. And I climbed the stairs, heart hammering every step loud. And in my old room, I shoved the envelopes and journal into a tote bag under a sweater, like I was hiding contraband. I stayed upstairs long enough to make it believable, pulled an old photo album off a shelf, flipped through it so the dust would stick to my fingers, and then walked back down holding the album like proof of innocence. "Got what you needed?" my mother asked, still not looking directly at my face. "Yeah," I said, and I walked out the front door before she could think of a second question. In my car, I locked the doors immediately, not because I expected her to chase me, but because my body was operating like I'd escaped something. My hands were trembling so badly, I dropped the keys once, and when I finally started the engine and pulled away, I didn't breathe normally until the house disappeared behind trees. Then I did the thing I hate admitting because it makes me sound dramatic, but it's the truth. I drove to a parking lot, killed the engine, and just sat there shaking while the tote bag sat on the passenger seat like it was alive. I kept thinking, I'm 32 years old. Why do I feel like I'm sneaking out of my own life? I didn't open the journal in the car. I waited until I got back to my apartment because I needed a controlled environment, like I was about to open a box that could release poison. In my living room, I pulled the curtains even though it was daytime, and I turned my phone face down, and I laid everything out on the coffee table like an investigator. First the letter again, because I needed to confirm it was real.
It was.
Then the journal. Thick, heavy, worn at the edges like it had been handled often. I opened it to the first page, and the handwriting matched the letter perfectly. My father's careful slant, the tidy loops, the arrogant neatness of a man who believed his thoughts deserved preservation. The entry started around the time I was born, and at first I tried to read like a normal person, one page at a time, but my brain wouldn't let me. I started scanning for my name, desperate, and there it was again and again, not as a daughter, as a project. The younger one asked, The second girl cried. She wants ballet. She wants piano. And then the pattern snapped into place so clean it made me nauseous. Every time I'd wanted something, there was an entry about how he shut it down. Every time I'd reached for an opportunity, there was an entry about how he redirected me into something smaller, safer for his control. He wrote about telling my mother to say we couldn't afford things. He wrote about praising Celine in front of me on purpose. He wrote about making her grateful for scraps like it was a parenting technique. And the sickest part, the part that made me laugh once, a short, ugly laugh, was the casual tone, like he was noting the weather. She cried herself to sleep. She'll adjust. Adjust. Like pain is just calibration. I kept reading until my eyes burned and my stomach cramped, and I was so locked in that I didn't notice I'd been whispering, "Wow," under my breath like a mantra. Then I remembered the sealed manila envelope, the one with wax. It sat there untouched like the final boss in a game. I stared at it for a full minute because something in my gut told me this wasn't just emotional cruelty documentation. This was legal. This was money. This was motive. I slid a finger under the wax seal and broke it, and the sound was soft but final, like cracking a bone. Inside was a formal document, aged but preserved, with a header that made my scalp prickle. It wasn't my father's will. It was my grandfather's. The will my father had always claimed was lost. The will he used to wave away whenever anyone asked why the family wealth moved the way it did. And I read the first paragraph, and my mouth went dry because it spelled out distributions not to one child, not to the firstborn, not to Celine as the chosen heir, but to grandchildren, plural, equal, fair, like someone had once tried to build a family that wasn't a rigged game. I read it again slower, and that's when I felt the true shape of what had happened, like the room tilted and my whole life slid into alignment. My father didn't just emotionally disown me, he financially erased me, and he didn't do it impulsively. He did it with paperwork, with strategy, with a pen. My phone buzzed on the table, a message from my mother that just said, "Did you find what you were looking for?" And I stared at that line and realized something that made my skin go cold all over again, because that question wasn't motherly curiosity, it was surveillance. She knew there was something in that desk. She might not know exactly what, but she knew enough to check. And in that moment, I understood the next move wasn't crying, or confronting, or posting on social media, because in families like this, confrontation without preparation is suicide. The next move was building a case, quietly, carefully, step by step, and then choosing the moment to flip the table when everyone thought the game was over. So I picked up my phone, didn't answer her, and instead I searched for one person whose name was on the bottom of that old document, the attorney who drafted it, and when I found a number connected to the firm, I called, and when a receptionist answered, I heard myself say, steady and clear, "Hi, my name is Mara, and I think my father stole my inheritance, and I have documents in his handwriting that prove it." And there was a pause on the line, the kind where you can tell the other person just sat up straighter, and she said, "One moment," and I watched the journal on my table like it was a loaded weapon, because I knew the second I said this out loud to the right person, my family's version of me would start collapsing, and they would feel it, and when they felt it, they wouldn't stay polite. The receptionist came back on the line with a voice that suddenly sounded less bored and more careful, and she said, "Can I put you through to Mr. Webb?" And my stomach dropped because the fantasy version of this moment had been me dramatically slamming documents on a desk while a lawyer gasped and said, "This changes everything." But real life doesn't do soundtracks. It does long silences and uncomfortable truths. And I swallowed and said yes, and then the line clicked and a man's voice answered, older, calm. The kind of calm that tells you he's heard every kind of family disaster and survived them all. "This is Daniel Webb." And my mouth went dry again because saying it once to a receptionist was one thing, but saying it to the person who could actually turn this into consequences felt like stepping onto a ledge, and I said, "My name is Mara." And then I stopped because I realized I didn't know how to summarize 32 years of manipulation without sounding insane.
He didn't rush me.
That made it worse. Take your time, he said, and I did, but not in a neat story, in a list like I was reading my own autopsy report. My father died, I said, and he left me $1. And then I found a hidden drawer in his desk, and inside was a letter dated the day I was born where he wrote he never wanted a second daughter, and a journal where he documented sabotaging me for decades, and a sealed envelope with my grandfather's original will that looks like it was hidden on purpose. The silence after that felt like standing in a courtroom before the verdict. "Where are those documents right now?" he asked. "On my table," I said. "In my apartment, and my mother just texted asking if I found what I was looking for." Another pause, shorter this time. "Do not send her anything," he said. "Do not confront anyone yet. Do not post online. Do not give your sister warning. Bring everything to my office today if you can. Keep it with you. If you have to leave the apartment, take the documents with you." These kinds of cases turn ugly fast when the person who benefits realizes they might lose. The way he said benefits like it was a loaded word made me grip the phone harder. "So you believe me?" I asked, and he didn't say yes like a motivational coach. He said, "I believe you have documents that deserve to be treated like evidence." That was better. I packed the letter, the journal, and the will into a plain tote bag, and then I did something that tells you exactly how my brain was working. I took pictures of every page with my phone, slow and methodical, making sure the date and handwriting were clear, because part of me was convinced someone would break into my apartment, and the first thing they'd steal wouldn't be my TV, it would be my truth. I drove to his office with my shoulders up around my ears the whole way, checking my mirrors like my family had suddenly turned into criminals, and the worst part is I couldn't even call that paranoia, because the journal had already proven my father moved like a criminal. He just wore a suit while doing it. Mr. Webb's office was small, quiet, the kind of place that smells like paper and coffee that's been reheated twice, and when he opened the door himself, he looked at me like he'd already decided to take me seriously. He was thin, late 60s, wire frame glasses, and he shook my hand and said, "You look like someone who hasn't slept." And I almost laughed because that was the nicest thing anyone had said to me all week.
He didn't make small talk.
He cleared a space on his desk, set down a legal pad, and said, "Start from the will reading." And I did. And this time I forced myself to stay linear, to explain who was in the room, how my sister Celine sat there like she was the guest of honor, how my mother Nadine kept her face smooth like she'd rehearsed grief in a mirror, how the lawyer said my inheritance was $1 and didn't even look at me when he said it. Webb listened with his head slightly tilted, not reacting emotionally, but tracking details like they were coordinates. Then he asked the kind of questions that made me realize this wasn't just family drama, it was a case. Who chose the lawyer for the will reading? Who had access to the desk? Was the home secured after your father's death? Did anyone try to stop you from entering the study? And when I mentioned my mother's text, his pen paused and he said, "That means she suspected there was something. That matters." He read the letter first, slowly, and I watched his eyes move across the lines where my father reduced me to an accident, and his jaw tightened just once, a tiny muscle jump, like a professional mask cracking for half a second. Then he opened the journal and flipped through, not reading every page, but scanning entries, checking dates, matching handwriting, and then he said quietly, "People always think monsters look messy. The dangerous ones are tidy." I swallowed. "What happens now?" I asked, and he leaned back and said, "Now we do two things at the same time. We lock down your evidence and we verify authenticity so no one can dismiss this as forged or fabricated." He explained it like he was laying out a battle plan. First, secure copies. Multiple. Store originals in a safe location. Second, bring in a forensic document examiner to match handwriting and signatures. Third, Check the probate filings and compare the will your family submitted with this original. Fourth, identify who benefited and who had knowledge. And Mara, he added, looking at me over his glasses, expect them to attack your credibility. They won't argue facts at first. They'll argue your character. That sentence hit me in the throat because my family had been doing that my whole life, quietly, and now they were about to do it loudly. I left his office with a sealed evidence bag, appointment dates, and a brain buzzing like a live wire, and as soon as I got back to my car, my phone lit up with a missed call from Celine. Not a text, a call. That meant she was nervous enough to risk leaving a voice trail. I didn't answer. Then my mother called. Then my cousin. Then a number I didn't recognize. It was like someone had kicked a hornet's nest, and every hornet had my name in its mouth. I sat there with my hands on the steering wheel and had this ugly, honest thought that I'm not proud of. I hope they panic. I hope their stomachs drop the way mine dropped when I read that letter. I hope they finally feel 1% of what they built for me. And then I drove home and kept my blinds closed and waited, because I knew the first wave would be confusion dressed up as concern. It came right on schedule. Celine left a voicemail that started sweet like syrup. Hey, little sis, it's me. Mom said you've been upset.
I'm worried about you.
Can you call me back so we can talk like adults? Like adults. The same phrase people use when they want you quiet. I didn't call back. 2 hours later, she texted, and the syrup turned into steel. I hear you've been digging in Dad's things. That's not okay. Stop. Not are you okay. Not what did you find. Stop. That's how you talk when you know there's something to find. The next day, my mother showed up at my apartment unannounced. I looked through the peephole and saw her standing there with her purse clutched to her chest like she was the victim of my existence. I didn't open the door. I stood behind it and said, "What do you want?" And she flinched like she wasn't used to me having a spine. "Mara," she said, voice soft, "I just want to talk." Talk about what? I asked, and there was a pause long enough to tell me she was choosing words carefully. "Your father's things," she said. "You took some things." "They were hidden," I replied. "You don't hide normal things." Her breath caught, and for a second I thought she might admit it right there, but then she did what she always did. She tried to wrap control in motherly concern. "You're grieving," she said. "People do strange things when they're grieving." And that's when I felt the shift inside me. The moment my sadness hardened into clarity, because she wasn't trying to understand. She was trying to label me unstable, so anything I said would sound like a symptom. "I'm not confused," I said. "I'm informed." Silence. And then she said the line that confirmed everything without meaning to. "If you tell people lies about your father, it will destroy this family."
Lies.
She hadn't even asked what I found. She skipped straight to calling it lies. I laughed once, sharp, no humor, and I said, "The family was destroyed long before I opened a drawer." She left after that, but not before she leaned toward the door and whispered, "You don't know what you're messing with," like a threat slipped under a prayer. That night, Mr. Webb emailed me the name of the document examiner and the appointment time, and then he added one sentence. "You may receive a cease and desist soon. Do not respond directly." I read that line 3 times, and it felt surreal, like my family had graduated from favoritism to litigation. And then, right on time, the next morning a courier knocked on my door and handed me an envelope from a law firm with a logo that looked expensive. Inside was exactly what Webb predicted, a letter accusing me of defamation, demanding I stop making false claims, and implying they'd sue me into dust if I didn't comply. I sat down on my couch with that paper in my lap, and I realized something that should have been obvious. Innocent people don't send intimidation letters before they even know what you have. And that's when I decided I wasn't going to play defense in private anymore. I wasn't going to be the only one swallowing secrets while everyone else ate comfortably. I texted Mr. Webb one line: "I want everything verified as fast as possible." And then I stared at my phone and thought about my sister's voice saying stop, and my mother saying lies, and the journal sitting in a bag like a confession that couldn't speak unless I made it speak. And I understood the next step wasn't a quiet negotiation. It was a controlled explosion. The kind where you pick the room, you pick the moment, and you make sure there are witnesses so no one can rewrite what happened after you leave. I didn't announce anything. I didn't post a dramatic screenshot. I didn't go live with shaky hands and a caption like "the truth," because that's what they were expecting me to do. Something emotional they could screenshot and show a judge later like proof I was unstable. So instead, I did the most irritating thing you can do to people who are used to controlling the story. I got organized, I printed everything twice, I labeled it, I backed it up, and then I chose a room where lies can't breathe. As easily, my mother's living room, on a Sunday afternoon, when family members are already half-dressed for judgment and bored enough to show up just to watch someone get embarrassed. I sent one group text to the relatives who always had the loudest opinions and the loosest facts. Family meeting. Sunday, 2 p.m. Nadine's house. Come if you want clarity. If not, don't message me later pretending you were confused. I kept it blunt on purpose because the nice version of me had gotten me $1 and a lifetime of silence. The responses started immediately, and it was like watching a predictable script unfold. Aunt Marla, this is inappropriate. Your father just passed. Cousin Jace, are you okay? Seriously. Uncle Benton, we should handle things privately. And then Celine, my sister, the one who had always been the family's polished spokesperson, sent the most telling message of all. If you embarrass Mom, I'll never forgive you. Not what's going on, not let's talk, just a threat wrapped in righteousness, which is basically the Frell family love language. By Saturday night, my phone was a landfill of guilt and warning, and my hands shook while I made coffee in my kitchen because even when you're right, standing up to your whole family feels like walking into a storm without an umbrella. I kept rereading my father's letter like a sick ritual, not because I enjoyed pain, but because it kept me grounded in reality. It reminded me I wasn't being dramatic. I was being late. Late to the truth. Late to myself. And then the morning of the meeting, I did something that felt ridiculous and necessary at the same time. I put on a plain outfit with no statement energy, minimal makeup, hair simple, because I needed to look like the kind of person who pays bills and reads contracts, not like someone auditioning for a meltdown. And then I placed the documents in a folder and held it like it was fragile because it was not the paper. The moment. Nadine's house looked the same as always from the outside. Trimmed hedges, clean driveway, that suburban calm that makes you forget how much cruelty can live behind curtains. And when I walked in, the living room was already crowded. There was my mother sitting on the main couch with her hands folded like she was attending her own trial, and beside her Celine with her legs crossed and her chin lifted, the way she always looked when she believed the room belonged to her, and then scattered around like a jury Aunt Marla, Uncle Benton, Cousin Jace, two other cousins I barely knew, but who had opinions anyway, and my brother-in-law Trevor leaning by the window like he wanted to disappear into the blinds. The air smelled like fake vanilla candles and old tension. Celine smiled when she saw me, but it wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile you give a bug right before you squash it. "So," she said loudly, making sure everyone heard, "what's this emergency?" I didn't sit down. I stayed standing near the fireplace because I needed to be able to leave if it turned into a shouting match, and also because standing changed the power dynamic. It made me less easy to corner. "Thanks for coming," I said, voice steady, and I looked around the room and did something my family hates. I made eye contact one by one because eye contact forces people to remember you're human. "I'm going to say this once," I continued. "I'm not here to grieve performatively. I'm not here to beg for scraps. I'm here because I found documents in Dad's desk that explain why my life has been treated like a mistake, and I'm done keeping that secret for everyone. My mother's face tightened. Celine rolled her eyes like she'd rehearsed disbelief. Aunt Marla exhaled dramatically, already offended. Mara, my mother said softly, "This is not the time." And there it was, the same phrase she'd used my entire childhood whenever truth threatened the image of our family. Not the time. Always later. Later never comes. It's exactly the time, I said, and then I pulled out the yellowed envelope. The room shifted. People can sense paper that carries weight. Dad wrote this the day I was born, I said, and Celine's posture changed so fast it almost made me dizzy. She sat a little straighter, the corners of her mouth tightening. That alone told me what I needed to know. I didn't read the whole letter, because I wasn't there to be theatrical. I was there to land the punch clean. I read the first line. I never wanted a second daughter. Silence hit like a door slamming. Someone's throat cleared. My mother's hands went to her chest. Celine let out a sharp laugh that sounded fake even to her. "That's insane," she said. "Anyone could write that." "That's what I thought too," I replied, and I could hear my own heart pounding, but my voice stayed calm, because calm is terrifying when you're delivering bad news. So, I didn't stop there. I pulled out the journal, thick, worn, real, and I held it up like evidence because that's what it was. This is 30 years of entries. His handwriting, his dates, his voice. He documented how he sabotaged me. I flipped it open and read one entry, short, surgical, the kind that leaves no room for interpretation, the kind where he described denying me a class or a lesson or an opportunity, not because we couldn't afford it, but because he didn't want me to have it. Aunt Marla's face went pale. Uncle Benton leaned forward. Cousin Jace muttered, "What the hell?" under his breath. My mother started shaking her head over and over like shaking could erase ink. Celine stood up abruptly. "Stop," she snapped, and there was panic under the anger now, a rawness she couldn't hide. "You're twisting things. You're grieving. You're doing that thing where you spiral. And listen, if you've ever been the scapegoat in a family, you know that line, you know it in your bones, because it's the same trick every time. Label your reaction as the problem so they don't have to face what caused it." I looked at Celine and I said, "You're not worried about my mental health. You're worried about your image." Her eyes flashed. "That's not fair." "Fair," I repeated, and I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because the word felt like a joke in that room. Then I pulled out the forensic report. I already had a handwriting expert verify the letter and the journal, I said, and I placed the report on the coffee table, slow, deliberate, like laying down a weapon. "This isn't a vibe. It's verified." The room buzzed. People leaned closer. Nobody touched it yet because they were afraid of what they'd confirm if they did. Celine's mouth opened and closed. My mother whispered, "Mara, please." And then, because I needed the room to understand this wasn't just emotional betrayal, it was financial theft, I reached into my folder and brought out the sealed will. My grandfather's will. The one my father claimed was lost. "This," I said, "is why he could afford to treat me like nothing." Uncle Benton frowned. "What is that?" "Grandpa Robert's will," I said, and I watched faces shift from discomfort to alarm, because money is the one language even toxic families speak fluently. "The real will," I added, and I could hear breathing change, quicken. Celine's voice went tight. "Dad said there was no will." "Dad said a lot," I replied. "In this will, Grandpa's estate was meant to be split among his grandchildren. Not just one. Not just the favorite. All." I let that hang for a second because suspense isn't created by talking faster. It's created by giving people a second to realize the floor is about to drop. And the signature on the will filed in probate, I continued. Doesn't match Grandpa's verified signature. Uncle Benton's face drained of color. Aunt Marla covered her mouth. My mother started crying, real tears now, not the performance kind. Celine shook her head violently. No, she said. No, you're making this up. You're trying to take what isn't yours. I'm trying to reclaim what was stolen. I corrected. And then I did the thing that turned the room from shock into chaos. Celine, I said, and I pulled out a single printed email. I was wondering why you called me instead of texting. I was wondering why you tried to scare me instead of asking what I found. And then I found this. Her eyes locked onto the paper like it was a snake. Trevor, her husband, straightened by the window, suddenly alert. What is that? He asked. Celine snapped. Nothing. I held it up. It's correspondence between you and Dad from 5 years ago, I said, and my voice stayed low but firm, because this part wasn't gossip. It was the moment the golden child's halo cracks. He explained the whole situation. He told you what he did, and you replied. I didn't even need to read the reply out loud because Celine's face did it for me, the panic, the anger, the calculation. Trevor stepped closer, eyes narrowed. Celine, he said, what is she talking about? Celine's voice went sharp. Don't listen to her. She's trying to destroy us. I looked at Trevor and said, ask her why she used the word understood in her reply. Trevor held out his hand. Give me the paper, he said, and Celine's head whipped toward him like she'd been betrayed. Trevor, no. That was the moment the room finally understood what kind of storm this was, because Celine wasn't denying the existence of the email. She was trying to control who saw it. Trevor took it from my hand anyway, and his eyes moved across the lines, and his face changed in real time, like someone turning down the brightness on a screen. You knew, he said quietly, and the quiet was worse than shouting. Celine reached for him. It's not like that. He pulled back. The room erupted. Aunt Marla started talking over everyone. Uncle Benton demanded to see the will. Cousin Jace kept repeating, that's insane, like his brain couldn't process cruelty with paperwork. My mother's crying turned into sobbing, and Celine just stood there with her mouth open like she'd swallowed her own script, and it got stuck in her throat. I didn't yell. I didn't gloat. I picked up my folder, slow and steady, because the goal wasn't to win an argument. It was to change reality. Listen, I said over the noise, and the fact that I didn't raise my voice made people quiet down enough to hear me. I didn't come here to ruin anyone. I came here because I spent my whole life being told to be quiet, be grateful, accept less, and I finally have proof that less was designed. I looked straight at my mother. You can cry, I said, but don't pretend you didn't know something was wrong. I looked at Celine. And you, I said, don't pretend you're shocked. You're scared. Then I did the one thing that made the room go cold again. There's more, I said, and I paused just long enough for everyone's stomachs to drop, because the will wasn't the only thing hidden, and the next piece doesn't just implicate Dad. It implicates whoever helped him keep it buried. The moment I said there's more, the room didn't just go quiet, it went offensive, like every person in there suddenly realized they were standing on a trapdoor, and the only question was whose weight would trigger it first. And that's when you learn something about families like mine. They don't fear the truth because it's painful. They fear it because it's expensive. Uncle Benton lunged for the coffee table and grabbed the forensic report like he was trying to snatch it before it could become real. And he scanned the signature analysis with his lips moving silently, like reading it out loud would summon a judge into the living room. Aunt Marla kept blinking too fast and whispering, "This can't be right," as if repetition could rewrite history, and my mother just sat there collapsing inward, her shoulders caving like a house settling after a storm, while Celine stood stiff, eyes darting between faces, already calculating who she could still control. Trevor, her husband, was holding the email printout like it had burned him, and he asked her again, slower this time. The way you ask someone you love when you're praying, there's a simple explanation. Celine, you knew about this? And Celine didn't answer him directly. She answered the room, which is always a tell. Everyone calm down. She's twisting things. She's always had a chip on her shoulder. And I swear the audacity almost made me laugh, because when the golden child is cornered, they don't defend themselves with facts. They defend themselves with your reputation. I stepped closer to the center of the room, and I didn't try to talk over the chaos. I waited until the noise started eating itself, until people got tired of shouting and their voices cracked, and then I said, if you want to keep screaming, go ahead. But while you're screaming, someone in this room has time to delete things. That snapped heads towards Celine instantly, because nobody forgets the way she had panicked when the email was mentioned, and now she was suddenly too calm, too composed, too ready to call me crazy, and Trevor looked at her like he was seeing the pattern for the first time. My mother's voice came out small, almost childlike. Mara, please, we can talk later. And there it was again, the family's favorite sedative, later. But I didn't come to be drugged back into silence, so I shook my head and said, no, later. Later is how Dad got away with 32 years. Uncle Benton finally looked up from the report, and I could tell his brain had switched from disbelief to math, because he asked the only question that mattered to him. How much are we talking about? And the way he said it, you'd think I was asking to borrow a lawnmower, not exposing a lifetime of fraud. So I answered him the way my father would have answered, clean, cold, specific, enough that he didn't just steal from me. If Grandpa's will was meant to be split among all grandchildren, then at least some of you were also supposed to receive something, and you never did, which means this isn't a me versus Celine story. It's a Harold versus everyone story, and the people who helped him are still alive. The word helped landed like a glass breaking. Aunt Marla's eyes widened, because now the blame wasn't neatly contained anymore. It was spreading, and toxic families hate spread because spread creates questions, and questions create accountability. Trevor finally handed the email to Uncle Benton, not to be dramatic, but because he needed someone else to confirm what he was seeing, and Uncle Benton read it, and his jaw tightened and he said, she replied, and Celine snapped, that email is out of context. And I said, then give the context, Celine, because you're the only one here who's had 5 years to prepare your speech. Trevor turned toward her fully now, voice low, dangerous. You told me your dad handled finances clean. You told me your sister was unstable. You told me the will was straightforward. And Celine's eyes flicked to my mother like she wanted backup, like she wanted Nadine to do what she always did, smooth it over, paint it pretty, make it go away, but my mother couldn't, because this time there were receipts. Then my phone buzzed in my pocket, and I felt my stomach drop before I even looked, because when you're in the middle of a family explosion, the only thing that can make it worse is a new spark. And when I pulled it out, it was a message from Marcus, the attorney Helen connected me with, just 3 words, check the registry, and beneath it a forwarded screenshot from a public records site, a document search result, my father's name, my mother's name, and something that made the room tilt. Quitclaim deed filed, and a date from years ago. I stared at it and felt my throat tighten because I suddenly understood what Marcus was warning me about, and I said it out loud before I could stop myself. He moved assets before he died, and the room went still again, a different kind of still, the kind where everyone realizes they may not just be spectators, they may be victims. Uncle Benton's voice went hoarse. What do you mean moved assets? And I forced myself to breathe, because if I spiraled now, they'd use it to discredit everything, so I spoke like a person giving a briefing. A quitclaim deed is a way to transfer interest in property, I said, and it looks like Dad transferred something into someone else's name before he died, which means he didn't just forge a will. He tried to make sure even if the will was challenged, there would be less left to take back. Trevor looked at Celine sharply. Into whose name? And Celine's face drained like someone pulled a plug, and she whispered, I don't know. But it came out too fast, too rehearsed. And that's when Helen stepped forward from the corner where she'd been quiet, letting the family burn itself out, and she said, You do know. And her voice was calm, almost gentle, which made it terrifying. Because Harold didn't make moves like this without witnesses, and he didn't trust Nadine with numbers. He trusted Celine.
The air changed.
My mother made a sound like she was trying to speak and couldn't find the words, and Celine exploded. You're lying. You're all teaming up because you're jealous of me. And Helen didn't flinch. She just asked a question that sliced through the noise. Then why did your father call you my executor in spirit in those emails? Trevor's head snapped towards Celine again, and his voice cracked with betrayal. Did you help him hide things? And Celine did what guilty people do when they can't deny anymore. She attacked the motive. I was protecting Mom, she spat. I was protecting the family, and I felt something inside me go ice cold, because that was the exact same justification my mother had used for decades. The family, the family, the family. Like family is a god that demands human sacrifice. I stepped closer to Celine, and I kept my voice low so it would force her to lean in and actually hear me. You didn't protect Mom, I said. You protected your position. You protected the version of this family where you get everything and I get told to be quiet. Celine's eyes glistened for half a second, and then her face hardened again. You want to ruin me? She hissed, and I replied, No, Celine. Dad ruined all of us. I'm just refusing to be the one who carries it quietly. That's when my mother finally stood up, shaky, unsteady, and she looked at Celine, not at me, and in a voice so small it barely filled a room, she said, Is it true? And Celine's head whipped around. Mom, don't do this. And my mother repeated, stronger now. Is it true? And you could see the power shift right there, not because my mother became brave all of a sudden, but because fear changes when the person you were afraid of is dead. And my mother's whole life had been living under Harold's shadow, but now the shadow was gone, and all that was left was what she'd allowed, and for the first time she looked like she couldn't stand it anymore. Celine's mouth opened, and she closed it, and then she said something that made my skin crawl. He said you'd fall apart without me. And she glanced at my mother like she expected sympathy. He said you needed me to handle things. And my mother's face twisted, like the truth finally sounded as ugly as it actually was, and she whispered, I didn't need you to handle things. I needed you to love your sister. Silence again, but this time it wasn't defensive. It was grieving, because even toxic families feel grief when the illusion dies. Trevor set the papers down slowly and said, I'm going outside, and he walked toward the door like his body needed air before his brain could process, and Celine lunged after him. Trevor, don't. And he stopped with his hand on the knob and turned, eyes wet. I married you, Celine, not your father's scams. And then he left, and the door shutting behind him sounded like a verdict. Cousin Jace finally spoke, voice shaky. So what happens now? And I looked around the room at the faces that had dismissed me, judged me, ignored me, and I said, now we do this the adult way, not the hush-hush church whisper way, not the keep it in the family way. We do it legally, because the moment you put fraud on paper, you don't get to fix it with apologies. Uncle Benton swallowed hard. Are you filing? And I nodded. Marcus is already preparing the probate challenge. And now we have another layer, possible asset transfers, which means subpoenas, discovery, financial records. And you could see panic ripple across the room again. Not because they cared about me, but because they cared about what would be exposed. Aunt Marla whispered, this is going to destroy the family. And I said, no, it's going to reveal it. And then I did something I hadn't expected to do. I turned to my mother and said, if you want to say something, now is the time. Because if she was going to keep choosing silence, I needed to know so I could stop hoping. My mother stared at the floor, and then she said, your father, he made me sign things. And the room froze, and she added, I didn't always know what I was signing. And my pulse spiked, because that wasn't just a confession. That was a doorway into something darker, something operational, something that could shift the case from inheritance drama to intentional concealment. Celine snapped, Mom, stop talking. And my mother flinched like a reflex, and that flinch told me everything about the last 3 decades. I stepped forward and gently said, What things? And my mother's voice trembled. Documents. Bank forms. A trust once. Harold said it was for protection, and Helen's eyes narrowed like a predator catching scent, and she said, What trust? And my mother looked at Helen, terrified, and whispered, I don't remember the name. And I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears, because a trust means assets can be hidden cleanly, moved quietly, shielded from probate, and if my father built one, then the will was just the surface lie, the visible lie, the one he let people find, while the real theft sat somewhere else, protected by paperwork and intimidation. I looked at Celine, and she looked back at me, and in her eyes I saw it. Not just fear of exposure, but fear of what would be found if we dug deeper, and I realized the next reveal wasn't just about what Dad did to me. It was about who he trained to continue it after he died, and I said, slow and clear, someone in this room knows the trust name, and the silence that followed wasn't random. It was targeted, because everyone's eyes drifted to the same person, Celine, who suddenly couldn't meet anyone's gaze. Celine didn't answer, and that silence wasn't the normal, I'm thinking silence. It was that I've been caught, and I'm deciding whether to lie bigger silence. And I watched her throat move like she swallowed something sharp, and then she did the oldest trick in the family playbook. She pointed at me like I was the hazard and said, Look at her. She's enjoying this. She's been waiting for Dad to die so she could blow up our lives. And I almost smiled, because when a liar can't address the evidence, they accuse you of a vibe, and Uncle Benton actually shifted his weight like he was about to agree, because it's easier to believe I'm dramatic than to believe your brother was a thief. But Helen stepped forward and cut straight through Celine's theater with one sentence, Name the trust. And she said it with the calm tone people use when they're about to open a vault, and my mother's hands started shaking again. Not from guilt this time, but from that old fear getting triggered, the fear Harold planted in her bones like a parasite, and she whispered, Please don't make her. And that broke something in me, because for once she wasn't asking me to be quiet. She was asking Celine not to be exposed, and I realized my mother wasn't protecting Celine out of love. She was protecting her out of habit, out of survival training. And that's when I said, Mom, I'm going to ask you something, and I need you to answer like a mother, not like a hostage. And the room went so quiet you could hear the refrigerator hum. Did you sign anything after Dad's last heart scare? Anything with notarized stamps? Anything that came with a folder he told you to hide? And my mother's eyes flicked toward the hallway, toward Dad's study, like her body knew the answer before her mouth did, and Celine snapped, Stop interrogating her. And I turned on Celine fast. You don't get to protect her now. You didn't protect me for 32 years. And Celine's face flashed hot. You keep saying 32 years like we chained you in the basement. And I said, No, you just chained my choices. And Helen let out a small breath like she'd been waiting for someone to say that out loud. Uncle Benton cleared his throat, trying to regain control. Let's all calm down. We can handle this privately. And I looked at him and said, Privately is how it stayed hidden. And he frowned, because that's when he realized I wasn't here to negotiate for peace. I was here to demand truth. And peace is expensive when you've been lying. My phone buzzed again, Marcus. And this time it wasn't a text. It was an actual call. And I stepped away toward the entryway so the whole room wouldn't hear. But of course they leaned in anyway, because family drama is a sport to them. It's gossip with consequences, and Marcus's voice came through crisp and controlled. I pulled the county filings. There are 3 property-related transfers in the last 8 years. And one of them references an entity, not a person, which is consistent with A. Trust or LLC. And my stomach sank. Do you have the entity name? And he said, not yet. The scan is partial, but I'm sending a clerk to pull the full instrument. And listen carefully. If there's a trust, you need to stop talking in front of everyone because anything you say can be twisted later. And I almost laughed at the irony. My whole life being told to stop talking, and now being told to stop talking for strategy. And I said, we're already past that. And Marcus sighed. Then do this. One thing. Photograph everything you found, keep originals in a safe place, and don't leave those documents in that house. And as he spoke, I glanced toward the hallway again, and I saw my mother staring in the same direction. And it clicked. She knew where the rest was. She knew exactly where it was. She just never had permission to admit it. I hung up and turned back to the living room, and Celine had changed her stance. She'd moved slightly closer to the hallway, like she was guarding it. And that alone told me the hallway was the gold mine, and I said, why are you standing like that? And Celine's eyes narrowed. Like what? And I pointed, like you're protecting a door. And she scoffed, you're paranoid. And then my mother finally said something that chilled me. He told me if anyone ever goes into the cabinet behind his desk, it would destroy us. And the way she said destroy, it was a metaphor. It was specific. Like Harold didn't threaten feelings. He threatened outcomes, lawsuits, exposure, ruin, and Aunt Marla actually gasped, hand flying to her mouth, because now it sounded less like family betrayal and more like a criminal stash. Helen's voice stayed steady. Nadine, did he ever mention a name, a lawyer, an account? And my mother swallowed. He said, the Hawthorne Trust once. And the room reacted like a match had been struck. Celine's head snapped toward my mother, eyes wide, and she hissed, Mom, why would you say that? And there it was, the confirmation. So clean it might as well have been notarized, and I said softly, Hawthorne. And I watched Celine's face, waiting for her to deny it. But her denial was delayed by just half a second. And half a second is all it takes to catch someone lying, and then she said, that's not real. Too fast, too flat, and Uncle Benton's eyes went sharp, because even he understood that a name means records, and records mean subpoenas. Trevor came back in from outside at that exact moment, and his face looked hollow, like he'd been on the phone with a reality he didn't want, and he asked, what's Hawthorne? And Celine turned on him like a cornered animal. Nothing, it's nothing. Stop listening to them. And Trevor's voice went quiet. Celine, I'm not listening to them. I'm watching you. And he looked at the documents on the table, the letter, the journal, the forensic report, and then he looked at Celine like he was finally seeing what marriage had been shielding him from, and he said, did you build a life on a lie? And Celine's eyes shimmered, but her pride wouldn't let her break. So she did what she always does. She played the victim. I'm being attacked, she said, by my own family, and I couldn't help it. I let out a dry laugh, one sharp sound, and everyone stared, and I said, you've been attacking me my whole life. You just called it normal. And then I looked around the room, and I asked the question I knew would start a civil war in the comments if this were playing to an audience. If your parents rigged the games so one child always wins and the other always loses, do you call that family loyalty? Or do you call it fraud with matching Christmas pajamas? And Aunt Marla's face tightened because she didn't want to think about her own family patterns, but the truth is uncomfortable like that. It doesn't just expose one person, it exposes the culture that let it happen. Helen stepped closer to me and lowered her voice. We need the trust documents. And I nodded. And then I did the thing I never did as a child in this house. I walked toward Harold's study without asking permission, and it felt like walking into a room that had been sacred for all the wrong reasons. And Celine moved to block me. Palm up? No. And I stopped inches from her and said, you don't own this doorway. And she whispered, venom in it. You don't know what you're doing. And I whispered back, I'm finally doing it. And then my mother spoke, barely audible. Celine moved, and Celine froze, shocked. because she wasn't used to being told no by anyone in that house, and my mother repeated it louder. Move. And Celine's eyes flashed with betrayal. After everything I've done for you? And my mother's face crumpled. Everything you've done was for your father. And Celine stepped aside like the air had been slapped out of her. I walked into the study and the smell hit me first. Leather and old cologne and stale cigar ghosting the curtains, and Dad's desk sat there like a throne, and behind it, the cabinet, plain locked, the kind of lock that's meant to slow you down, not stop you. And I turned back to my mother. Do you have the key? And she shook her head. He kept it, and Helen's eyes narrowed. Then we don't need a key. We need an inventory. And she pulled out her phone and started recording, because Helen is the kind of woman who doesn't trust memory when court exists. And I grabbed a flashlight from the shelf, and I knelt, and I felt along the underside of the cabinet like I'd learned from the false bottom in the desk drawer, and my fingers found a tiny metal latch, and I pressed it, and something clicked inside like a secret exhaling, and the cabinet door eased open a fraction, just enough to show a thick black binder, a stack of envelopes, and a small metal lockbox, and before I could touch anything, Celine's voice sliced through from a hallway, sharp and panicked. Do not open that. And in that moment, I didn't need another forensic report, because fear is the most honest confession there is. And I looked at Helen, and Helen looked at me, and we both understood the same thing at the same time. Whatever was in that lockbox wasn't just paperwork. It was leverage. The kind Harold would keep to control people even from the grave. And I reached for it anyway. My hand hovered over that lockbox like it was a live wire, and I swear I could feel Celine's panic vibrating through the doorway. Because when people spend years hiding something, the moment you finally touch it, they don't argue morals, they argue speed, and Celine was all speed. Put it down, she said, voice cracking, and Helen didn't even look at her. She just kept recording with her phone held steady like a surgeon's hand, because Helen knew what I was just learning in real time. The truth doesn't need emotion. It needs documentation. And I slid the lockbox out slowly, metal scraping against wood, that dry squeal of friction that somehow sounded like a confession, and it was heavier than it should have been, not just from the contents, but from what it represented. 32 years of being told to stay out of that room, and now the room was giving up its secrets like it was tired of being loyal. My mother stood in the doorway with both hands pressed to her mouth, eyes glossy, and I caught her whispering, "Oh God." Not like a prayer, more like someone recognizing an old terror, and I asked her without turning around, "Mom, did you ever see this?" And she shook her head fast. "He never let me. He said that cabinet was business." And Celine snorted bitterly. Everything was business to him. But her tone didn't match her words because she wasn't agreeing. She was distancing, like she wanted to be seen as a spectator to a crime she benefited from, and Trevor stepped closer behind her, face tense. "Celine, what is it?" And she shot him a look that could cut glass. "Nothing you need to worry about." And he blinked. "That's not an answer." And I finally turned with the lockbox in my hands and said, "It's always been answers. That's what this family avoids." The lockbox had a simple combo dial. Not fancy, not high security, the kind of thing you buy because you want the illusion of protection, not actual protection, because the real protection was fear, and Harold had plenty of that installed in the walls. And I set the box on the desk carefully, like it could explode, and Helen zoomed in with her phone, capturing the scratches and dents, capturing my hands touching it, capturing the exact moment the lie became physical evidence. And I looked at Celine straight on. "Give me the code." And she laughed, sharp and ugly. "You're insane." And I said, "I'm done being polite." And I glanced at my mother. "Did he ever make you open it?" And my mother's voice came out thin. "Once." And Celine snapped, "Stop talking." And my mother flinched like a dog that's been trained to expect a slap. And that tiny flinch made my stomach turn because it told me Celine had inherited more than money. She'd inherited the posture of control, and I softened my voice for my mother. "What was the code?" And my mother swallowed hard, eyes darting like she was replaying a scene she wanted to delete. "He said, Meredith's birthday. And Celine went rigid. That right there was the sickest part. Even in death, Harold was still dedicating the vault to the golden child. And I didn't even hesitate. I spun the dial with steady fingers, month, day, year, and I listened for the clicks, tiny metal teeth catching, and the last number landed, and the latch popped with a sound so small it almost felt anticlimactic. But the room reacted like a gunshot. Celine lunged forward. No. And Trevor grabbed her wrist hard. Stop. And she hissed. Let go. And he said, not until you tell me the truth. And my heart was pounding, but my hands stayed calm because I've learned something about people like Harold. Their power dies the moment you stop shaking. I lifted the lid, and the first thing I saw wasn't cash. It wasn't jewelry. It was paper, thick, organized, labeled, and Harold's handwriting was everywhere, neat and smug like he enjoyed being precise about other people's pain. And right on top was a folder with a printed label, Hawthorne Trust, and under that a second folder, Distributions, and under that a third, Contingencies, which is a polite word for blackmail. And I felt my skin go cold because I realized we weren't just looking at inheritance paperwork. We were looking at control mechanisms, backup plans, ways to punish anyone who stepped out of line. Helen's voice stayed calm, but I heard the steel in it. Do not touch anything yet. Show the camera. And I angled the open box so she could film every page, every label, and then my mother made a sound that wasn't a sob. It was a choke, like her body was rejecting something it had swallowed for years, and she whispered, he kept it all. And I asked, kept what? And she shook her head again, tears dropping fast now. Everything, every letter, every threat, every promise. And then Celine broke. Not into tears, into rage. This is sick, she spat. He's dead. Why are we still letting him ruin us? And I said, because you kept his system running. And she snapped back, you don't know what it was like. And I leaned forward. Then tell me, what was it like being the chosen one while he erased me? And she opened her mouth and nothing came out. Because the truth is hard when you've spent your whole life being rewarded for not saying it. I picked up the Hawthorne Trust folder, and inside were documents with clean letterhead, trustee names, and then a page that made my throat tighten, a schedule of beneficiary allocations, and my name was there, not as a beneficiary, as an exclusion. Literally a clause spelling out that I would receive nothing unless I complied with family directives and residency expectations and conduct requirements. And I laughed. One bitter breath, because the man didn't just dislike me, he drafted me into a contract I never signed, and I looked at my mother. You knew about this, and she shook her head violently. No, he never showed me the details, and Helen cut in. Nadine, he said you opened it once, and my mother swallowed. I opened it, and he took it away. He said I wasn't allowed to read. He said it was too complicated, and my chest tightened with anger, because that's not complexity, that's containment. And then I found the second folder, Distributions, and this is where things stopped being a family scandal and started looking like a case, because there were bank statements, wire confirmations, transfers from the trust to accounts labeled with initials. One of them matched Celine's married initials, and Helen zoomed in instantly. Hold that page. And I held it up, and Trevor leaned in, eyes scanning. Celine, is that you? And Celine's face went white. That could be anything. And Trevor said, low and dangerous. That's your initials and our old address. And Celine's voice rose. He was my father. He gave me money, so what? And I snapped, money that wasn't his to give. And then I flipped to another page, and my stomach dropped again because there were also transfers to something labeled legal retainer, and a name beside it, an attorney's name, and then a note in Harold's handwriting. In case Ingrid ever gets curious. I swear my vision tunneled for a second. He planned for me waking up. He planned for my curiosity, like it was an enemy attack. He didn't just control my past, he ensured my future. I turned to Helen, voice steady but sharp. Record that note. And she did, And then I found the folder called Contingencies, and I didn't even want to open it because my gut already knew what it was, but I did anyway, and the first page was a list of names with bullet points under each. And some of the bullet points were disgusting, private weaknesses, rumors, things you'd only know if you'd been stalking your own family, like a hostile investigator. And next to my mother's name it said, fear of public humiliation, threatened divorce narrative, mention Helen. And next to Celine's name it said, keep dependent, reward loyalty. If she wavers, remind her she benefits. And next to mine it said, starve affection, offer crumbs, keep her hoping. I felt my teeth clench, so hard my jaw hurt. He wrote my childhood like a strategy memo. And Celine saw that page too, and for the first time her rage flickered into something else. Shame maybe, or fear, because she wasn't just exposed as a beneficiary, she was exposed as a puppet, and Trevor's grip loosened but his voice got colder. You let him use you, and Celine whispered. I didn't know, and I looked at her. You knew enough to threaten me the moment I started digging. Helen's phone kept recording, steady, relentless, and she said softly, this is bigger than one will. And I nodded. And in that moment, I made a decision that felt like stepping off a cliff. We're taking this box, I said, and my mother gasped, you can't. And I said, watch me. And Celine lunged again. That's theft. And Helen answered for me, no, it's evidence. And Trevor stepped back like he didn't want to touch any of it, like the whole room had become radioactive. And then my mother did something I didn't expect. She moved between Celine and the desk and she said, with a trembling firmness I'd never heard from her, let her take it. And Celine stared at her like she'd been betrayed by gravity. Mom, and my mother whispered, I'm tired. And that line hit me harder than anything because it was the first honest sentence she'd said in decades. I gathered the folders carefully, stacked them back into the box, and as I did, one loose envelope slid out from under the trust papers and landed on the desk, and it was sealed, thick, and on the front was a single line in Harold's handwriting that made my blood run cold. If Ingrid ever finds this, open last. I didn't open the envelope right away, because I've learned something about people like Harold. The final message is never closure. It's a last attempt at control, and I wasn't about to let a dead man steer my hands. So I slid it back into the lockbox, snapped the lid shut, and in the silence that followed, Celine's breathing sounded loud and uneven like she'd just run upstairs. And my mother was still standing between us with her shoulders hunched like she'd been carrying this exact moment since the day I was born, and Helen kept filming without blinking because she understood what I was finally accepting. If you want truth to survive a family, you treat it like evidence, not a confession. Trevor stared at Celine like he'd just met her for the first time. So all those trips, he said, voice flat. All those gifts you said were from your bonus or your savings, it was him. And Celine tried to laugh, but it came out wrong. You're making it sound like I robbed a bank. And Trevor's eyes snapped up. Did you? And she snapped back, no. And I stepped in. Not a bank. Just me. Just everyone in this room who didn't get to choose the rules. My mother whispered, please, and I looked at her. Please what, Mom? And her lips trembled. Please don't make this worse. And I said, it was already worse. I just finally saw it. We left the house with a lockbox like it weighed nothing, but the air outside felt heavier, crisp autumn wind that smelled like wet leaves and chimney smoke. The kind of day that usually feels peaceful until you realize peace is only peaceful when it's real. And Helen walked beside me to my car, still recording, making sure the camera captured the box in my hands, captured Celine on the porch not following, captured my mother's face in the doorway, looking like someone watching a dam break. And I slid the lockbox into my trunk, shut it, and for a second I just stood there with my palm flat on the metal like I could feel Harold's fingerprints through it. Where now? Helen asked, and I answered without hesitation, Marcus. Because Marcus wasn't just a lawyer. He was a reset button. He was how you take a private nightmare and drag it into a courtroom where lies don't get to call themselves love. In the car, Helen finally lowered her phone and looked at me. "You okay?" And I laughed once, sharp and small. "No, but I'm awake." And she nodded like she understood exactly what that costs. And then I said, "Before I keep going, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Because I need to know I'm not the only person on earth who has ever stared at their family and realized they were written out of their own story." And then I gripped the wheel and drove. Marcus's office smelled like paper and old coffee, and that smell should have been comforting, but my stomach was too tight for comfort. And when he saw the lockbox, he didn't smile or make small talk. He just cleared his desk like a man preparing for surgery, and Helen set her phone down and said, "I recorded chain of custody from the moment it was opened." And Marcus's eyebrows lifted, impressed, smart. And I said, "I'm done being naive." And he nodded once like that sentence was the beginning of recovery. We opened the lockbox again, and this time there was no family noise, no dramatic doorway, no Celine performing innocence, just the soft rustle of paper and Marcus's careful hands flipping through documents with a kind of reverence that felt almost holy. And the more he read, the quieter he got, until finally he exhaled slowly and said, "This isn't just a forged will issue." And I asked, "What is it?" And he looked up. "It's an entire scheme. Trust manipulation.
Fraud.
Potentially criminal misrepresentation. The contingency notes alone are damning," and my throat tightened. "And Celine?" And Marcus didn't even blink. Celine benefited. The transfers tie her to it financially. Whether she knew the legal structure or not, she received the money. That matters. Helen leaned forward. "And if Ingrid ever gets curious, retainer?" Marcus tapped the page. "That shows intent." He anticipated a challenge and funded defenses to discourage it. I felt my stomach churn, not with fear, with disgust, because that's what it is when someone plans your suffering with the same calm they'd plan a vacation. Marcus slid the sealed envelope toward me. "Now we open this," and I held it for a second, feeling the thickness, and I said out loud, "He wrote, 'Open last,' because he wanted the last word." And Marcus said, "Open it anyway," and I did. The seal broke with a dry rip, and the paper inside was crisp, newer than the other documents, and the first thing that hit me wasn't the words, it was the tone, that familiar confident cruelty disguised as reason, and it started with my name like a judge reading a sentence. Nora. And that's when you understand how deep the control goes. He didn't even address me as his daughter. He addressed me like a problem file. The letter said he knew I would find the box, that he always knew I would eventually get ideas planted by outsiders. And yes, he used that exact word, outsiders, like love is a gated community, and then he wrote the line that made my hands go numb. Everything I did to protect the family from imbalance. Imbalance. Like I was a weight on a scale. Like fairness is a disease. And then the letter got worse, because he started rewriting history, saying I was difficult from birth, that I competed for attention, that I forced their hand, and I wanted to laugh because the audacity of blaming a child for the adult's cruelty is a special kind of evil. And then, right there, he admitted it, not in emotional language, in business language. I structured the distribution to ensure Celine remained the primary heir. You were never meant to inherit influence. Influence. Not money. Influence. He didn't fear me being rich. He feared me being equal. Marcus read over my shoulder, jaw tightening, and Helen whispered, "Keep going." And I did, and then Harold wrote, "If you push this into court, understand that you will ruin the reputation your mother depends on. Choose wisely." That was his last attempt at control, weaponizing my mother against me even from the grave. And my mother wasn't even in the room, and I still felt the old leash tighten around my throat, the reflex to protect her, to protect the family name, to protect the image. And I looked up at Marcus and said, That's the whole trick, isn't it? He trained me to feel guilty for telling the truth, and Marcus nodded. Exactly. And that's why we don't negotiate with it. Helen leaned back and let out a breath like she'd been holding it for 25 years. He always thought fear would outlive him, she said, and I answered, not today. Marcus laid out the plan in plain English. File an amended petition, include the trust documents, include the forensic handwriting report, include the video chain of custody, subpoena the banks, subpoena the law firm connected to the retainer, and then, the part that made my pulse spike, we also request depositions from Celine and your mother. And I said, my mother is not a villain, and Marcus didn't soften it. She may not be a villain, but she's a witness, and she's been used as a tool. If she's finally ready to tell the truth, it helps you. If she's not, the documents still speak. I swallowed hard, because this is where real life stops being a story and starts being consequences. We left Marcus's office with copies, timelines, and a court date request in motion, and on the drive back Helen said, Celine's going to panic, and I said, good. And then my phone buzzed like it heard us say her name, and there it was, Celine calling, and I let it ring out, and then she texted immediately. We need to talk. You're taking this too far. And I stared at the words and felt something calm settle over me, because when someone who's been protected their whole life says too far, what they mean is too exposed. I didn't respond. 15 minutes later, my mother called, and for a second my hand hovered, the old reflex answer, fix, soften, but I answered anyway, and her voice came out small. Nora, please, Celine is screaming. She says you're going to destroy all of us. And I said, Mom, listen to me carefully. Harold destroyed us. I'm just turning on the lights. And she whispered, he said you would do this. And I said, of course he did. He wrote scripts for everyone. And then I heard her inhale like she was about to run back into the old role, and I cut in gently but firm. Mom, I need you to decide if you're going to be a mother today or a witness for his legacy. And silence hit the line like a wall, and then she whispered, I can't lose Celine. And I said, you already lost me once. Don't do it again. And her breath shook. What do you want me to do? And I told her exactly how, not just what. I want you to stop covering. I want you to stop pretending. If anyone asks you, you tell the truth. If you get pressured, you say, I'm not discussing this without counsel. And if Celine threatens you with shame, you remember shame is what Harold used to keep you quiet. She didn't answer right away, but when she did, it was barely there. Okay. And that tiny okay felt like the first real brick of a new foundation. The next day, Celine posted. Of course she did. These families always go public when they can't control private, and she crafted it like a pity performance. Some people use grief to attack the family, and she sprinkled words like mental health and confusion and misunderstanding. And you already know how that goes, because it's always the same smear template. Paint the truth teller as unstable, so the lie can stay comfortable. And my phone lit up with relatives doing what relatives do best, inserting themselves where truth is. Inconvenient. Think of your mom. Keep it private. Don't embarrass the family. And I didn't reply to any of it, because I wasn't fighting emotions, I was building a case. Marcus filed the amended petition, and within 48 hours, Celine's attorneys sent a letter. Thick paper, expensive ink, full of threats and dramatic language, but Marcus read it and smiled like it was a child's tantrum. They're scared, he said, and Helen nodded. Good. And then the real moment hit. The moment that satisfied the audience's craving, because the court granted expedited discovery based on the new evidence, which meant no slow dragging, no endless delays. And then we got the first subpoena returned from the bank, and the numbers matched every transfer, every retainer, every distribution, and there was one extra surprise. A transfer to an account none of us recognized at first, and then Marcus traced it and his eyes narrowed. This is a shell account connected to Celine's husband. And my stomach dropped. Trevor, and Helen whispered. So, he benefited too. And suddenly the story wasn't just father versus daughters. It was a whole network of people eating from the same hidden table. Trevor called me that night, voice raw. I didn't know, he said, and I believed he didn't know the full structure, but I also knew he liked the lifestyle, and I said, Trevor, if you didn't know, prove it. Tell the truth in deposition. Bring your records. Don't protect her lies. And he swallowed. She's my wife. And I answered. And I was her sister. There was a pause, and then he said quietly, What do you want? And I told him, I want you to be honest once. Just once. And he hung up without agreeing, which told me everything. The week of depositions arrived like a storm. Celine showed up wearing a perfect suit and a perfect face, but her hands shook when she held her water bottle, the cap clicking against the plastic, and I watched her from across the hall and thought, this is what happens when the golden child meets daylight. And my mother arrived looking like she hadn't slept in a year, and she wouldn't meet my eyes at first, and then she did, and her eyes were red and she whispered, I'm sorry. And I didn't forgive her in that second, but I did something else. I nodded because acknowledgement is the first crack in a wall. Celine went in first, and through the door you could hear her voice rise and fall, sweet then sharp, denial then anger, and then the moment came, because Marcus slid the bank transfers across the table, and Celine's voice went quiet, and then he slid Harold's contingency notes, and then he slid the if Ingrid ever gets curious retainer memo, and Celine's lawyer tried to object, but the evidence was clean, and Celine finally snapped. You're twisting this, and Marcus's voice stayed calm. No, Miss Hawthorne, your father wrote it down, and there's nothing more terrifying to a liar than their own receipts. Then my mother went in, and this was the moment that mattered more than money, because a mother telling the truth rewrites a child's nervous system, and I didn't hear everything, but I heard enough. I heard my mother say, he controlled me, and then I heard her say, he told me to be cold to Nora, and then I heard her say, I did it. And that last part made me close my eyes because it was brutal, but it was real, and real is what we needed. When she came out, she looked like she'd been emptied out, and she walked straight to me in the hallway, and she said, I told them, and I asked, all of it, and she nodded, tears falling without performance, and she whispered, I chose wrong for so long. And I didn't hug her, not yet, but I said, you chose right today. The settlement offer came 2 days later. Huge numbers, confidentiality clauses, non-disparagement, the usual hush money package dressed up as peace, and Marcus slid it across the table and said, this is them trying to buy silence. And Helen laughed. They always think money is a mute button. And I looked at the offer and felt something surprising, not temptation, insult, because after everything, they still thought the goal was to pay me off, and I pushed it back. No, I said, I want the ruling. And Marcus nodded like he expected that. Then we go to court. Court day arrived, and the courtroom was packed, not just with relatives, with strangers too, because people love watching a perfect family crack. And Celine sat behind her attorneys with her chin lifted like she could posture her way out of fraud, and my mother sat alone behind me, small, quiet, and Helen sat beside me like a guardian. And when Marcus presented the lockbox evidence, the chain of custody video, the trust documents, the bank transfers, the letter, the judge's face didn't change much, but the judge's eyes did. They sharpened. And when Marcus read Harold's line about protecting the family from imbalance, I heard a few people in the back scoff, because even outsiders can smell manipulation when it's written in black ink. Celine's attorney tried to frame it as a family dispute, and Marcus cut through that cleanly. This is not a dispute. This is documented fraud spanning decades. And then came the moment that satisfied the craving. The judge ruled the trust structure was used improperly, ordered redistribution according to the authentic intent, ordered restitution. and allowed further review for potential criminal referral based on the forged documents and misrepresentation. And in that instant, Celine's face collapsed, not into tears, into emptiness, because the pedestal was gone. Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed, relatives whispered. Celine's lawyer pulled her away fast, and my mother stood behind me like she didn't know where to stand in a world where Harold wasn't commanding the room anymore, and she finally said, "Is it over?" And I looked at her and said, "The money part will wrap up. The healing part takes longer." And Helen squeezed my shoulder. "But you won." And I shook my head. "No," I said, "I got my name back." Later that night, I sat alone with the lockbox open one last time, not because I needed evidence now, but because I needed to see it and understand it didn't owe me anymore. And I pulled out Harold's final letter again and read the last lines I hadn't read out loud before, and it ended with, "You were never meant to be here." And I stared at that sentence and felt the strangest peace. Because when someone shows you their cruelty that clearly, you stop trying to earn their softness. I folded the letter, put it back, closed the box, and I texted Helen, "Thank you." And she replied instantly, "You did the hard part." And then my mother texted too, a simple message, "I'm here if you ever want to talk." And that was the first time in my life she offered presence without conditions. And here's what I want you to do right now, because I know you're sitting there thinking about your own family, your own version of being erased, your own moment where you realized love was being rationed like it was a privilege. So tell me in the comments, did Celine cross the line the moment she benefited, or the moment she tried to silence me? And what would you have done if you opened that lockbox and saw your childhood written like a strategy plan? Would you expose it or swallow it to keep the peace? Because I'm telling you straight, peace that requires your silence is not peace. It's a hostage situation. And if you want next story you should watch, go watch the one about the kid who found the note their parents hid, because it's the same kind of betrayal wrapped in family packaging, and it shows you exactly how control works when they think you'll obey, and exactly what happens the moment you don't.